All right, so picking up where we left off, we have this truck, or at least I had the truck. You drew something else. Some of you really enjoyed it, have something amazing. Some of you are frustrated. I get it. Just know that there's other things you're definitely going to want to draw in here quick. You could easily go into Photoshop and do some editing there and bring it in. But for now, just get used to this, and I'm going to show you why here with some of the stuff that we're about to do. And just to let you know, I do want to add an animation to this, so that's part of what this evening's screencast is about. Um, and I didn't want to make little nuance changes in here, right? So I drew my truck. I have it all figured out how I want. But now I want to make some little things, yeah, and it's just be so much easier to do that in Photoshop, right? Because I know it. It's quick to just grab a little certain area and all that. So to do that, once you have it drawn, if you want, you go up here to this little save disk, and then you can see it says save current frame, save all that stuff, and that's fine. You just want to do save current frame, and what it's going to do is, see that? It's going to export this thing, which I would do here, truck.png. It's going to just save it as a PNG anywhere that you'd like, okay? Which is cool. And then after you do that, you can go over here to Photoshop. You can see here's my truck and start making little edits to it, okay? If you know Photoshop as well. If not, what you can do is just hover around in here and make little changes from frame to frame. Yeah, and you'll see that here in a second. So the first thing is I want to name it, right? So animation 1, that's not anything that we can deal with, right? Because we're going to start talking about triggers and doing things. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click and rename this thing to idle, because I want this to have a small little animation to it while it's just sitting still a little bit. Yeah. And I'm going to be duplicating this frame. I want to duplicate it because I want the position of the truck to be the same, but also the position of this here, right? I want to make sure that my little polygon thing is as is, so right about there. So now literally when I hit duplicate down here, it is going to do just that. Everything is going to be duplicated. The truck, the position of this polygon, everything, okay? So I did that. And now I want to just kind of have two things happen down here where it goes from this position to maybe if the truck was like squatting, right? So it looks like it's like shaking a little bit. And all I have to do is come down here. You can see that it says idle frames. I got to mess with my frames. And I have this frame, and I do want to duplicate it to keep all the properties. And I'm going to go ahead and say duplicate. Right-click, duplicate. Now I have this truck. It's exactly the same. And if I wanted, I could do things, right? So I could come up here and grab the checkered thing, and maybe I just wanted the wheels to move a little bit. So I could just select that. See that? And cut. Where's cut? Cut and paste it and do something, like maybe make it go like this, or just something. Like there's little details I could have absolutely done in here, but I don't want to do that, right? I want to make it look exactly how I want it to, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And the cool thing after deleting that is it keeps that onions thing. Remember this onion? So it keeps that onion of the truck just to make sure it stays in the right spot. And I just, as I told you, I went to Photoshop, I made some changes. So now I want to bring in the other frames, and that's just hitting that folder, navigating to wherever you saved it, and I called it truck idle. And when I do that, you can see there's just a small little difference, but it's not lined up. And I want this thing to kind of squat a little bit. So what I'm going to do is select it, and now I'm just going to move it down like that, okay? So there we go. I can double check on my poly there, and you can see between the two that everything is just fine. See how I click on it? Looks pretty good. And then I can test this if I wanted, right? So I'm going to come up here and right click on my animation and say preview. And wow, not much happening, right? It just kind of up and down, up and down. Cool, great. So I have some things that I want to do to this. And the beauty of these rapid authoring tools, not just Construct here, but also Storyline and Captivate, is you can see when I have something, it lets me know that it's highlighted. So I click on this, I see that it's blue. I click down here, I see that it's blue. And the beauty of it is all of the properties really adapt to whatever is selected. So if I click on this frame here, which is frame 0, you can see that it says frame properties. The index is at 0, the duration is at 1. We could do whatever we want. I'm going to go ahead and keep my duration at 1 on this one, but maybe over here I'm going to change my duration to 2. And then you can see when I make a selection, it gives me information about what it is, right? So here it is. Duration is the relative time to spend on this frame. 1 for normal, 2 for twice as long, etc. Right? So there we go. So now when I come up here to this animation, I can right click and say preview. And it's pretty much the same thing, except it's not as fast. Okay? But I do know that I have this opportunity of properties. So I click on here and I get my frame properties. But when I click on this, I get my animation properties. I get the name, right? So the name is idle. Speed we can worry about later. But I see this thing here called loop. And we know what loop means, right? Everything goes in a loop. It goes around and around and around and around and around. So I want to click on that. Repeat the animation forever. See that? See how it gives me a little information down here consistently? So that's going to be nice. So I'm going to keep it at that. And I don't need to worry about all that. So now when I right click on this thing and go to preview, there it is. There's my truck just kind of sitting at a red light waiting, you know, like son of a gun. Got a delivery. But so there we're good, right? So now I can close this out. I got my truck here. And again, if I just click on this white space, you can see my properties panel adapts to just my content area. The moment that I click on my truck, you can see that it adapts. What I didn't do was name it. Darn it. So I want to do that right away. I want to make sure this is called truck. I don't need to worry about a lot of this, but one thing I want you to notice way down here at the bottom is we have animations. Okay? And this particular animation, you see it says edit here. You could probably presume when I click on that, it just opens up this editor. But then you can also see that I have this thing called initial animation. Now I don't have any other animations, so it's only going to be that idle. But that's something neat where you don't have to add a trigger for it to do anything. You could just say, we'll set the initial animation to that. And then the initial frame is 0. I mean, you know that mine is only 1 or 2, so I don't have to worry about that. And then, of course, I can preview it here. So if I click on that, you can see that my truck driving along would look just like that. Okay? So hopefully you have some sort of character that you can add an animation to. As you can imagine, this is my idle animation. I'm going to go into later about what it's going to look like while he's driving. But for now, that's that. Okay? So next up, I want to move on to kind of really start to get some game elements to this. And this is just because our very next assignment is going to be to develop your title slide or screen or whatever the heck you want to call it. And we're going to do these little things just to kind of give it some character. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and we know about Sprite. Sprites are great. Sprites are absolutely wonderful for creating like trees and trucks and everything like that, your characters. But what I want to do is a kind of like a platform or a road for my truck. And that's the beauty of this thing here called tile background. And I'm going to go ahead and name it right away. So I'm going to name this ROAD. And click on this, insert. And this you don't want to do as big. I want you to consider this as the repeat, no repeat feature when you're doing your HTML and you're doing your websites. I want this to actually repeat, like a repeating div almost, right? And I'll do that by just making this a little bit smaller. So let's say 55 and no, I'll do this. It doesn't really matter, and you'll see why here in a second, but I want my design to be a certain way. So there we go. And I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit. There. So all I want to do is a road, right? So here I have gray, which is fine. And I'm going to add a little something to this for no apparent reason whatsoever, because I want to show you the pattern aspect of it. So there. We have a bit of a pattern here, no big deal. It's just this, okay? But the beauty of what I get to do now is when I close this, and there you see my tile. That's what I made. It's the exact size and everything that I wanted it to be. But I wasn't quite sure, and I want to reuse it, so watch this. Now when I drag this out, see how it just repeats that pattern that I did? See that? I mean, does it look amazing? Like, I'm not trying to win awards here, but I mean, you could see how that is, and that just helps with your game, right, in making all of these things. So that looks good, right? And preview this thing with that little triangle up there, and then a little awkward. I got my truck up here, and I got my platform down there, right? What I want to quickly get into, because you're going to want to do this right away, is this character, or whatever it is that you want to be controlled, needs to have certain behaviors applied to it so we can later control it or do stuff and things to it. And it's nothing more than selecting it, right? So we know that when you select it, that the properties panel adapts to that. And we have to look for variables, right? Excuse me, not variables, behaviors. And you can see right here it says behaviors, and I can add edit behaviors. When I click on that, what I really like about these construct things is it organizes it for you, and it's very suggestive, almost for you to, you don't really need to know too many things to just kind of figure it out. Like, I don't want to add an attribute to it, right? None of this stuff makes any sense. General here is anchored, what the heck, you know? But if I cruise down here, we see this thing called movements, and I'm mentioning that I want this to, we want to control it, right? And there are some things here, so you see car and all that. But what I see here is platform, right? So I'm going to click on platform, and it says platform, jump and run along platforms. So I'm going to say add. So that is giving me the ability to have turned this basically into a character. And that's all I really had to do was apply that, which is now something that I can control. Now, of course, we're going to have to do some stuff on the event sheet, but for now, it is a character that I can control. And what it really does in this world that we have, this little 2D world, when I hit play here, whoa, see it went away? What it essentially did, as it is a character, is it added gravity to it, right? In this little Construct 3 world, it added gravity to it, so that way it can move along, jump if we have to, and not have to worry about putting all that code in there of if you hit this jump and all that. So interesting. The platform was great. I mean, excuse me, the character was great, but it just went right through our platform, didn't it? I mean, I wanted to land right on this truck right here. I mean, this road. And all I have to do there is everything that we're going to do, if it's part of the game space, like if it's a platform or a wall or a rock or something, we need to add behaviors to it. So we're just going to have to get into the habit of knowing that when we create something and it's going to interact with our game space, is we have to put behaviors on it. So in this particular behavior, it is a road, right? And the only thing that I need to add to it is this one here called solid. And now solid is one that you're going to use quite a bit. You're going to use solids again if you're going to have a wall. You're going to use it if you have some sort of character that you want your truck to run into and lose points. It just needs to be a solid so it becomes part of the game space. So I'm going to say add. So we see it, we have a solid now. So now when I go ahead and preview this thing, instead of following all the way through, kaboop, you can see my truck sits on idle right here, just ready to go. Okay? Not bad, huh? Excuse me. And one thing is, I want you to be mindful here of if you see my wheels are sitting directly on the road, which is good. And the reason that they are, and let me show you, is because of this polygon collision. Okay? So if I were to move this all the way up, if I were to move this all the way up here, let's say, and now when I go to preview this, now remember I only did this in one frame. Okay, so this is going to look quite weird, but here we go. Now when I go to preview this, see what it's doing? It's actually not considering the wheels as the bottom of the sprite anymore because I moved those collision points. Okay, so those collision points are going to be where it actually collides with solids and other things. So now all I have to do is move that back to what it was. And that's close enough. And now you see when I preview this, it's back to sitting on the road. Okay? So there we go. Here we are so far. We've drawn a little something. We've created a little something. We've added a small animation to it. And we added some game behaviors to it where we have this is now something that is going to be controlled on a platform. And we know that these platforms we can turn into solids to be part of the game space. Okay? Some other things. I just want to do a little bit more now. So say you have other things that you want to do. And we have to remember that one of the reasons that we went and planned out this game is I do in fact want this truck to sit idle. If it's not moving, if it's just sitting somewhere, I just want it to idle. But if I want to hit, say, the forward arrow, or if it's on my phone, if I want to kind of make it move forward, I need to add additional animation to it. So maybe like make the wheel spin, you know? So I want to add additional animations to this. And I did that simply, and I think I showed you here. So here is Photoshop, and all I did was bring it in. I showed you how I exported it. And then you see the wheels here as I go through my images. You see how they're just slightly turning a little bit and doing some things. So that's all I did to just add that extra detail to this thing. So now when I come back over and I want to do a new animation, okay? And it's not going to be difficult to do, so all I do is right click. I could duplicate this if I wanted. Or I could just right click and say add animation, which I'm going to do that and rename this thing to say driving. Okay, so this is how you add additional animations. And you'll see here shortly why, or at least I'll discuss as to why. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull in truck. Okay, leave everything as is, except I do, since this is a new animation, I do want to mess with my poly. So my collision points are how I want them. Okay, so that looks good. Then you know that I come down here and I want to duplicate it, so I'm going to say duplicate. I'm in 1. Kind of back up here and I'm going to delete the truck. And now I'm just going to bring in truck 1. Okay, not much difference except for it looks like my wheels are going to be turning a little bit. Okay, right click, say duplicate. Select and delete it. Truck 2. Okay, right click, duplicate, delete it. Folder. Truck 3. Okay, I'm sure you're catching the pattern here. Except now, this is my, I want to move that down because that was a little bit shorter. There's going to be a bit of a hop to it. Okay, duplicate, delete, and I think truck 4 is my last one there. Truck 4, select it, make sure it sits nice. Okay, so there we go, okay? And we know how to do all these things, right? I have no problems here with this index and duration staying at 1 because I do want it to make it look like it's rolling about. I know that I could come up here, and I definitely want to make this thing loop. Maybe I'll make this just to see what happens. I'm going to make this thing go 10, okay? And now I'm going to right-click and say preview. Look at that thing go, huh? I mean, again, that is a real looking truck. So now when I close this, you can see things a little bit different here, that I have other animations. So when I come down here, my initial animation is idle, which I want. But if I wanted it to be driving, I could just set it to driving. Now I come up here and hit play, and he looks like he's driving. Okay, and you're probably wondering what it is that I would want this to do. Well, when we go to control it, right, with our event sheets, you could see that naming is important, right? So this says bullet. Mine would say truck, and I'm not going to collide with anything like that, but it would say truck on keyboard right arrow, and then I would say play animation driving. And then when I let go of that, it would play the animation of idle. Right, so that's some of the things that we're going to start going through there is organizing our animations, okay? So there we go. That is adding an animation to something that you might have done. And I think that should be good enough to get you started there. Just really start messing with your animations. If you're doing a person walking, you know, think about how easy that would be to just make something here, export it over to Photoshop, distribute it into layers if you want, but then you can have them moving around and all of those things, okay? So really try to just keep going with this animations editor. Really get into the habit of this. And then we'll start doing some directions to this later. But we're just going to be driving along, okay? So that's it. Enjoy this, and we'll pull up next week with doing some other animations to it.